thinking is internalized talking.
Yes.
So most people think by talking.
That's one of the dangers of podcasts. Is you're thinking out loud.
Yeah. Well, but it's also one of the things that makes it exciting, right? Because if it's real, then people are along for the... And it's cool because I kind of do the same thing in my lectures. I don't prepare my lectures. I have a question in mind that I'm trying to answer. Then I go on stage and I try to answer the question or investigate the question at least, you know. And as I've got better at it, usually what happens is I go a bunch of different places and then I can snap it together at the end. And that's fun, you know. It's like all these plates are in the air and you just bring them all together at the end. It's like the final punchline of a comedian's set.
Exactly like that.
Yeah, it is. It's exactly like that.
When bits are constructed.
It's like a callback.
And that's what you're trying to do when you're constructing bits. You're trying to figure out how to tie it together optimally.
Yeah. Well, to dispense with what's unnecessary, right? To get to the gist and to tie it together. And it's so fun when you can land on your feet. I've been watching Tammy do this when she's learning how to tell a story on stage, you know, and her stories are about 10 minutes long. She has an opening. Here's the problem set. And then she lays out some narrative and says, well, here's, you know, how we could explore this. And now and then she can go and snap.
It's nice.
You know? Oh, it's so nice.
Yeah.
It's like, you got to the point.
Yeah.
And the point, that's the direction. That's the moral of the story.
Yeah.
Jokes do that all the time.
Yeah.
So
that's the goal.
I think the closest thing to what I do on stage is probably what stand-up comedians do. You know, although you guys usually run through a prepared set, but you have a universe of potential jokes, right? And my suspicions are that you're watching how the audience is reacting and crafting what you're selecting to, you know, to bring everybody on board. And you want to tell a story that has a narrative arc and it comes to a conclusion. Have you noticed in your podcast that if you're really paying attention to the dialogue, that the podcast has a narrative arc all by itself?
Yes.
It's so cool, eh?
Yeah.
That you'll see, oh, we're halfway done. And then, well, now here's the natural ending.
Yes.
And that's cool that narrative emerges just as a consequence of focused attention, but it's definitely the case.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it's a very fascinating way to explore life publicly. Right? It's a very fascinating way to explore life publicly and allow other people to take in some of these thoughts and form their own.
Yep.
Because that's what a lot of people are doing.
Yeah.
Right? They're listening to this and they're actually thinking about various aspects that resonate with their own life, and then applying their own unique view of the world to that.
Yeah.
And and seeing how they could maybe use it to enhance them or whatever they disagree on, why they disagree on it, and solidify that position in their mind as well.
And the good podcast does two things at least. It presents people with some new information, which was part of why I love doing podcasts. Like, it's such a privilege, and you know this perfectly well, to call anybody in the world up and say, hey, I'm pretty curious about this.
Right.
And you look like you know more about that than anyone else in the world. Would you like to talk about it?
Yes.
And then they say yes. It's like, well, that's a pretty good deal.
Yeah.
And so you get to have that experience of learning, but at the same time, you can model the exploration of ideas.
Yeah.
And so then people, they learn two things. They learn whatever the facts of the matter are, let's say, but they also learn how to conduct an exploratory dialogue. And both of those, if you can learn those both at the same time, that's perfect.
Right.
And that's really, you're basically using the Socratic method of instruction, right? Because the Socratic method was all inquiry. It's like, what do you think about that? What do you think about that? And like, you're not asking the audience, but you are essentially, because you're a proxy for the audience. It's like, I don't know what this means. Do you want to explain it?
Well, oftentimes I am too, because I might know what the answer is, but I have to ask it anyway because I want other people to know it.
Right.
So instead of saying it, I have to ask.
Yeah.
And I have to, and also it's like, I want to know how people think and how they come to these conclusions, which is really fascinating in and of itself, because everyone's path to whatever their own conclusions are very different.
Yes. Well, one of the things you learn in therapy as a therapist is you can't really provide people with the answer. So maybe, someone will come to me with a set of problems and I'll think, well, I know how to solve that. And I could just tell them. But what happens if you tell them is they just don't do it.
Right.
So what you want to do is you want to ask them a bunch of questions about the problem and about what they might view as a hypothetical solution. And then they develop the intermediary steps along the way to the conclusion, then they're actually likely to act it out. Same thing happens with kids. You have to walk people through the process. And, a lot of what we both do, I think, in our podcast is we invite people along for the ride, right? Instead of presenting a package of pre-programmed options.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
You get that a bit because you select the people you talk to, but you can't talk to everyone, and you're going to have a viewpoint. So that's, as long as you're not playing games with that or any more than than you can avoid.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for me this has been like an unexpected education in a very bizarre way. When I first started doing it, I didn't think I was going to get educated. I thought I was just going to have fun with my friends and fuck around. Mm-hmm. And then along the line, bringing guests on, then it just sort of evolved on its own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right.
I often think that this thing made itself.
Yeah.
As bizarre as that sounds.
Well, okay, yes and no. It made itself in some way, but you followed the golden thread of what was meaningful and interesting, and that is a spirit. That's the golden thread that leads you out of the maze, and something, you'll be conducting a podcast and something will grip you, and you think, oh, there's something there. And then maybe if you're awake and aware, then you start doing more of that, and that has a life.